Listen, sometimes when you work with people, maybe you do a little huff, under your breath, because you don't want to say anything directly.
Passive aggressive.
Yeah, a little passive aggressive. But then there are other times where, like, maybe you work together and then you go on to have separate careers and you still feel like, hey, I really owe something to that other person because a lot of my success was bundled up in this thing that we did together. But boy, is that guy turned into a real creep, you might be thinking. I mean, you might be thinking that if you're Julia Louis-Dreyfus and you've heard some of the absolute blather that has come out of the mouth of Jerry Seinfeld over the past couple of months. And you'll recall that Jerry Seinfeld went on the New Yorker podcast and whined that you used to have great sitcoms like Sanford and Son and All in the Family and MASH. And now because of leftism and wokeism, you can't have those anymore. Now, first off, I think almost all the sitcoms he named were made by Norman Lear, who was one of the most famous Hollywood lefties there is in terms of like in the modern era, at least. At least like liberal left. I mean, those shows he did were woke for that time. They mocked Archie Bunker. They showed a upper middle class black family. The Jeffersons moving on up. I mean, these were all woke shows, frankly, by the standards of that era. But putting that aside, the implication was that you can't make any funny shows anymore, which is Jerry Seinfeld's way of saying, like, I can't make a funny show, but it's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault. And then he went on to prove everybody that was the case when he came out with his Pop-Tarts movie that, honestly, maybe one of the biggest busts in Netflix history or something.
Seinfeld Unleashed.
So, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, they did an interview with her in the New York Times Magazine. And interviewer asked, talking about Veep, it does make me wonder about your political satire and how hard it is nowadays to be funny about politics.
You do it every day.
Your former co-star, Jerry Seinfeld, recently made news for talking about political correctness in comedy. I'm wondering, as a famous comedian yourself, what you think about that. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is not a petty person and quite polite, it seems to me, but she also, I think, is not too happy about letting that bullshit just lie out there. So she writes, if you look back on comedy and drama both, let's say 30 years ago, and really I think she's getting her timing off because he was talking about 50 years ago. Let's be clear. The shows that he was citing were 50 years old.
Let's pretend it's still the mid-2000s.
70s and maybe early 80s. Through the lens of today, you might find bits and pieces that don't age well. And I can tell you, the movies that I grew up on, the comedy movies that I grew up on, and I will show Saul any movie. Like we watched Last Tango in Paris a couple of times, and he felt uncomfortable about that. But I will show Saul just about, any movie. But the comedies that I grew up on in the 80s in particular, are horrific. I mean, they're all like date rapey and
Porky's.
I mean, unbelievable. But also a lot of like, even like as late as like the early aughts, a lot of homophobia, a lot of like weird semi-racism.
Yep. There's a real, I would notice, I feel like maybe 2015 or 2016 even, just an insane amount of antagonism toward fat people and homeless people.
It was, I watch these things now and it's like super cringy. Yeah. I mean, beyond it. And, there's some of these movies that I forget what they were about. and I show them to Saul. Like, we watch Ted. Now, I know the language is not great. And I had to find myself like saying to him afterwards and stopping the movie and going like, all right, dude, this is not funny. It's sort of gross. And it's, this is from a different era and it's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
And
when you were growing up, was the Mickey Rooney character in Breakfast at Tiffany's, were people still thinking that's funny, or was it like, oh, we've moved on a little bit from Mr. Yuniyoshi?
I think when I was a kid, that was
It's still funny.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I was curious, yeah.
Yeah.
Also because that type of caricature existed in like the John Hughes movie, like 16 Candles. There's the, look, duck, dong.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that was a
stereotype,
sitcom standby for
Yeah.
into
Oh
the
yeah.
90s.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So she says, if you look back on comedy and drama both, let's say 30 years ago, through the lens of today, you might find bits and pieces that don't age well. And I think to have an antenna about sensitivities is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that all comedy goes out the window as a result. When I hear people starting to complain about political correctness, and I understand why people might push back on it, but to me, that's a red flag because it sometimes means something else.
Yeah.
Remember, she's answering a question explicitly about Jerry Seinfeld. I believe being aware of certain sensitivities is not a bad thing. I don't know how else to say it. And then I would put in parentheses without being more explicit and, calling out Jerry for being a douchebag. Are there things that no longer feel funny to you that once did, or things that are funny now that you didn't notice before? Oh, that's a good question, she said. We're going to have to revisit that question because I don't know quite how to answer it.
Then she goes further afterwards and answers it.
When I hear, I want to make sure I answered this whole idea of political correctness correctly, and I can't really remember what I said, so I want to go back to that and be very clear where I stand. My feeling about all of it is that political correctness, insofar as it equates to tolerance, is obviously fantastic. And of course, I reserve the right to boo anyone who says anything that offends me while also respecting their right to free speech, right? Now remember, keep it up there. Remember, this is what Jerry Seinfeld complained about years ago. I'm doing my gay king character, French king character, and the college students are all booing me because they're so woke. Because your stuff is just not funny anymore. Like, you're making a joke about, like, what is this newfangled motor vehicle? I mean, honestly, that's what it feels like. It's anachronistic. She goes on to say, but the bigger problem, and I think the true threat to art and the creation of art, is the consolidation in money and power. All of this siloing of studios and outlets and streamers and distributors, I don't think it's good for the creative voice. So that's what I want to say in terms of the threat to art.
Perfect answer.
Perfect answer. 100% the case. The idea that the audience's tastes change because of a progressive view on people in our society. I mean, I'm sure there was a time where, like, jokes that made a play on how women are more or less your property, or how it's always like, wah, 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 and their job is to just bring you your food. I'm sure there was a time where that played and that was funny. But then over time, people were like, hey, you know what? Actually, no, this is ridiculous. And part of it was because, like, oh, women started being part of the audience. Asked for whether comedy is better or worse now that comedians are well attuned to the potential for backlash, Dreyfus couldn't say. I can't judge if it's better or not, she said. I just know that the lens through which we create art today, and I'm not going to just specify it to comedy, it's also drama, it's a different lens. It really is. Even classically, wonderfully, indisputably great films from the past are riddled with attitudes that today would not be acceptable. So I think it's just good to be vigilant. I mean, and this is someone who put on, Veep was an edgy show. It wasn't the, the most edgiest, but it was a funny show. It was cutting.
It was genuinely funny.
It was genuinely funny. It was genuinely satirical. And I don't think Larry David would come out and say these things, would address this about Seinfeld, but I have no doubt he basically feels very similar things.
And it is like so often these free speech conversations, when they're had by the sort of top of the industries, it's obscuring a material conversation that needs to be happening, which is like you said, the streamer economics, which is just, it's not hollowing out just entertainment, but or also music. Like all these things, these are conversations
Our
that need
culture,
to be had.
our culture, and our news. I mean, for that matter, like all of this consolidation. What Seinfeld's doing reminds me of like early in my days at Air America. I'm in the car. I was driving with my then wife, and this NPR segment comes on, and you know, when I started doing Air America, like even prior to that, I was like, my tolerance for NPR got even less and less. And they were talking about how the FCC was really on top of things because of the Janet Jackson shirt malfunction. And I'm like, this is the problem with NPR, because they're making it like the FCC is on top of things because they're going after CBS for, for a nipple being on television for, 2 seconds or whatever it was, as opposed to the media consolidation, which has far greater implications on our society. And when people crow about political correctness, wokeness, whatever it is that they're calling at any given time, DEI, whatever it is, they're doing one of two things, and sometimes both things. One is they're making excuses for their own failures. I recall Nick DiPaolo once telling me when I had cast him on a show that he had to move back from LA because you couldn't get a job if you were a white guy in Hollywood. And this was in the 90s, folks. Or you are also obscuring material issues that have far greater inhibition on things. Or there's a third, you don't like the new standards. You like the old standards. The ones that favored you, as opposed to the ones now that have made things that have arguably diminished your power in whatever marketplace or environment.
Level the playing field.
Because the playing field has been leveled. When I went out to LA, the reason why I did 10 pilots in the course of 4-5 years, network pilots, was because every time I walked into a room, not every time, but many times, to meet with an executive producer, or whenever they saw me on tape, they looked at me and they go like, oh, that's me 20 years ago. If I had hair. Honestly, that's what it was. And that was what my advantage was. So I walked in there and I was like the guy writing the thing. And if there's somebody else writing it, there's somebody else who's like the person writing it. I mean, it was I could capture their voice because it was we had the same voice. Just some other dude from either Massachusetts or New York. So, bingo dango. Ask Lenny Bruce whether or not comedians used to need to be aware of society's sensibilities back in the day. 100%. If you don't know who Lenny Bruce is, you should go and look up and listen to some of the stuff he did. So a lot of the stuff, like, he had a bit about the N-word. And the idea being that, if we reappropriate it, He had a bit about, I think it was JFK coming out and referring to all his cabinet as the N-word, and how all of a sudden, and then the word would have no power. It was an interesting theory. I don't know if it worked or not. Would work, but he also was arrested multiple times in Chicago for saying anti-Catholic things, or that were perceived Catholic, or swearing in a club, and for saying stuff about Jackie Kennedy. He had a bit about Jackie Kennedy where he was complaining that, I can't remember if it was a news report or somebody on the television had claimed that Jackie Kennedy tried to jump onto JFK when he was shot to protect him, put herself in between the bullets and her husband. And Lenny Bruce was like, no, she wasn't. She was trying to get out of the car because someone was firing at the car, which is exactly what she should be doing. I don't want my daughter to feel like she's got to throw herself in front of a bullet for her husband. She has her own life, and she should be allowed to save it. And I think that was maybe one of the things that he got arrested for. Chicago.
He was arrested, looks like 5 times in the early 60s for using terms like cocksucker and schmuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if it's the greatest show. I know it's not, but Marvelous Miss Maisel has he's a character in that. That's
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
I do actually like that part of that show.
And he's portrayed well, yeah.
I have all the albums, all of his albums. Some of the stuff is really amazing. He had some great stuff about like going up and seeing, going up to God, heaven, and trying to justify why he was making so much money performing at Madison Square Garden when a teacher was making nothing.
I think it's wild how modern his stand-up sounds compared to how much some of it, comedy doesn't age well, and then some of that seems like, this is the same speed.
Yeah.
But I think something about Bruce and also George Carlin to an extent is that both of them sort of understood about the direction of which they were punching was not based off of just being, so you can't say something about a certain minority group. It was about who was in power and who wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I thought Lenny Bruce did very well too is he would indict himself in the
Self-aware.
Yeah, he was self-aware, but also like he understood that he was part of a system.
Right.
Number 646-257-3920. I have turned the phones on. Trump change. I remember the Chevy Chase Richard Pryor N-word interview skit as being important at the time, but no, it couldn't fly today. Yeah, speaking of woke media, Jerry Lewis, The Day the Clown Cried, might come out soon after being stowed away for being too offensive or just bad. Jerry Lewis plays a clown leading kids to the death camps during the Holocaust. Yes, I know this, and I've seen parts of it. It's been someone, I want to say it was Patton, but I can't remember who it was, would do live screenings of this at one point, and readings of it. Trump-Mitz connection. Ralph Nestoroff wrote a book, Outrageous, The History of Comedy and Culture War, about how there have always been old foot comedians complaining they want to keep doing blackface or ethnic accents, and the kids today just don't get it. Possibly an interesting guest. High value male Kowalski. A year ago, YouTube algorithm decided to give me a bunch of Don Rickles roasts of other comedians, politicians, actors from the 70s and 80s. A lot of the humor is definitely dated, but it seems like humor might last more when the subject is a person sitting 10 feet down laughing along with the joke. A lot of his jokes towards Mr. T would be quite problematic these days. Yes. Daredevil. Sam, question for you. You have lots of hilarious, edgy comedian friends. John Benjamin, Mark Maron, Andy Kindler. Who among them can make you edge the most? What does that mean?
Well, I think they're trying to be a little bit cute. I think we could just rephrase it as who makes you laugh the most.
What is the edge thing supposed to be?
Edge is a sexual thing.
Yeah. Oh, well. They all have their attributes. All three of those guys. Trump change. I grew up loving the Dick Van Dyke Show, but can't watch it today. 502 Drew. Marin just had Larry David on his podcast and didn't ask him about Seinfeld's recent whining. Wish he would have, although you're probably right. Larry wouldn't say anything of substance about it. It's not inconceivable to me that before he went on, he said, I'm not going to talk about that. Callie and Mac. I work for an online comedy. We rebranded a few years ago to be more woke, and I was going through our catalog sketches from 2008 to 2011. It blew my mind how 50% of the jokes were just workplace sexual harassment using the R slur. Now we have much more inclusive content, and we're doing pretty well financially, and I like our content audience a lot more now. Reassessing your values and changing is a good thing. I mean, honestly, if you go back and watch some of these things, it is disturbing.
Comedy is almost like psychology sort of exercise where you reveal your insecurities. Like you see all the comedians talking about gay people in the 80s. It's like, damn, society was really working through something.
Totally. I mean, totally. And the funny thing is that, like, I think in a lot of instances, those comedians at the time were actually probably the most progressive about it.
Ahead of the culture, yeah.
Ahead of the culture. Because people were even afraid to address it in society. I mean, so, I think it's possible to look back and go, this is a joke that was good for the era.
Yeah.
But it's not good now.
And it's interesting. Eminem recently came out with new music, and so kids are discovering the 2000s era.
Saul is he's like, do you know who Eminem is? And I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah. And like I'll say, even at the time, I was like, some of this ain't gonna age too well.
Yeah.
Saying
he knows that some of it is bad.
In the 80s, I think it was mostly, partially the AIDS panic response was either no one was talking about it, or comics or other people willing to breach that would say something.
Yes.
And then now it's kind of the trans panic is
panic, yeah. Homeless stuff. It is sort of a Rorschach.
Yeah. But good for Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Good for her. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.